In 1994, the Sega Genesis was in a bit of a rough patch. The system was starting to show its age. It had rapidly lost any sort of ground they'd gained against Nintendo during this time, competing against the Super Nintendo, and their shiny new Sega CD add-on wasn't performing as well as they'd hoped. So what did they do? They released a second cartridge-based add-on for the Genesis that looked like a fungal growth coming off the top of the system, releasing it only a week after their new system launched in Japan, and used a popular secondary character to try and carry a game for the system because they didn't want to risk the reputation of their main mascot on a product that I'm sure everyone knew was doomed from the start. If only they had that sort of foresight nowadays. The game was shit, the add-on was shit, and Sega was shitting away plenty of money because of it. But of course, at the time, in an effort to try and actually get kids to bug their parents to go out and buy them a $200 addition to an aging console and a $50 game to go with it, that is where this special comes into play, introducing us to a group of characters that would go on to have a much more successful life in this comic than they ever did in the game series that spawned them. The cover is nice, if a little generic. It's your basic team formation with the heroes standing in a line, front and center, with the main threat behind them looking quite transparent. Also, all the text makes it look really freaking busy, that's for sure. We open on a wordy explanation about how Angel Island is a private place, and yet somehow it still ends up getting some visitors. Sonic and the Freedom Fighters are on the island, apparently invited to a giant freaking carnival. According to Sonic, every freedom fighter they've ever met is there, and even Knuckles is there with them, despite insisting that he is not a freedom fighter and he is not happy to have so many people on the island. Sonic questions who invited them then, if it wasn't him, and then we meet this Ratigan wannabe, Renfield T. Rodent. Looks like a trustworthy guy, who says he established this amusement park for their amusement. One would wonder how he managed to build this park right under Knuckles' nose on a floating island, but that's not really brought up at all. The rodent coaxes the freedom fighters into a fun house, which is probably the third red flag we've seen in the first 3 pages. After all, nothing good ever happens in fun houses. Just ask Bob.
The fun house!
And of course, I'm proven right when a blinding flash causes all of the freedom fighters, sans Knuckles, to get trapped inside mirrors. And that is when Robotnik makes his entrance, revealing the fact that he and Renfield were working together, using this place as a literal tourist trap to round up all of Robotnik's enemies in one place and then capture them all at once. Knuckles makes a lunge for him, but is surprised to find his strength and abilities are gone. Robotnik explains that the energies he released in that big flash have nullified Knuckles' natural strength. Makes perfect sense then that it just captured everyone else, but not him, I guess. What's more, Robotnik just lets him run off, stating that his victory just wouldn't be complete without a witness to his plan succeeding. There's that ego again, Robotnik. Knuckles sits on a hill overlooking the carnival, contemplating his situation. And new look, as his sharp knuckles are gone and his locks are shorter, preventing him from punching and gliding. But who should happen by but Charmy Bee, who apparently wasn't at the carnival with everyone else and thus wasn't captured. They're shortly joined by Espio, who was listening in on their conversation, which wasn't really much of a conversation to begin with. A loud sound catches their attention, and then they follow it to where Vector the Crocodile is jamming out. Once they relieve the gator of his headphones, they don't even get a chance to properly introduce themselves before Mighty the Armadillo smashes his way through a cliff face and joins the party, accompanied by the 2 final members of the Chaotix, who were apparently so unimportant that they didn't even fit on the front cover, Heavy and Bomb. While initially leery of the 2 robots, they explain that they are Mighty's friends, and were built for independent thought by Robotnik. But due to this, they concluded that what the Doctor was doing was wrong, growing a conscience, and not only escaped, but also stole a chest full of power gems, which are totally not Chaos Emeralds since they aren't green. And boom, teams formed. Barely any sort of word exchanged between them, they just all happen to meet up and decide to team up against Robotnik. Well, at least they all have a common goal in mind. Cut back to Robotnik and Renfield, the 2 of them enjoying their victory, assured that everything is just as they want it. And then an alarm starts going off. Robotnik is displeased to find that all the rides have been reactivated. While Renfield thinks it's just Knuckles at first, Robotnik points out that all the rides were reactivated at once, and since each of them have their own switch, it must mean Knuckles isn't acting alone. He brings back an old friend, Eka Sonic, from back in the Sonic CD adaptation, rebuilt and looking a touch more threatening, or ridiculous, however you want to describe it. I mean, look, he's got shoulder pads now, he's totally more dangerous. Robotnik sends the robot after Knuckles and his crew, and we immediately cut to the group confronting the mech. And while I've complained before about the fight scenes in this comic, this is actually a really well-staged one, well-paced, and gives each of the Chaotix a chance to shine and show off something unique about them, and how they work together as a team. Doesn't really reflect well on Mecha Sonic, as he gets trounced fairly easily by all of them. However, even after Bomb takes care of Mecha Sonic with a great big kaboom, they are faced with a massive red Mecha Sonic that makes me think of a badly designed Power Rangers villain. Just look at that jaw! Knuckles takes a power gem offered by Heavy and uses it to make himself grow. Even depowered, he's easily able to punch the giant mech into submission, forcing it over towards the Hall of Mirrors, the fight and the energies of the power gem causing all of the mirrors to shatter and the Freedom Fighters to burst free. And somehow shattering the mirrors also restores Knuckles' abilities, allowing him to finish off the giant mech in one mighty punch. Robotnik and Renfield make a run for it, but Robotnik kicks him away from the escape roller coaster, no seriously, and takes off without the rat. When Renfield makes a run for the park entrance, he gets caught in a game of mousetrap and then is hauled off by these Muppet-looking cops, while Sonic congratulates Knuckles and co on a job well done, even pushing them to form a new team. Despite the fact that they were able to work together so well after just meeting with one another, they seem under the impression that that's a terrible idea, all of them putting on the lone wolf act. But Sonic says that it's not the last we've seen of the Chaotix, and he's right since we have a couple of backup stories here. But before that, let's go and look at this one again. The story moves at lightning speed once again, and doesn't really slow down to explain itself, giving quick, confusing explanations to justify frankly bizarre choices, like stripping Knuckles of his abilities, which in the end didn't amount to much. The way that the Chaotix seem to work so well together but then decide that they don't want to work together, it's very odd, and the whole story feels very much like a licensed product. I mean, it is a licensed product, but it just feels like something that was slapped together quickly in order to have something to coincide with the game's release. I know that's not the case considering how comic book publishing works and how issues are often done months in advance of their intended release date, but it doesn't change the fact that the story here is pretty bare bones, and apart from a very well done fight scene, we don't get a good grasp of any of the new characters here or what they can do. Heck, apart from being really eloquent, Heavy himself does absolutely nothing but provide exposition through this entire story. The artwork is good, though. The new characters are actually given more personality from their designs and movements in the artwork rather than their dialogue. Despite being a one-off character, Renfield does manage to leave an impression with his sleazy design. Not sure how to feel about Mecha's design in this one, but I will just say that at least we can all agree on one thing. Bomb's design in this comic is freaking adorable. Look at that little thing! Unfortunately, the artwork of our backup stories is, well, how to describe it? It'd be okay for an amateur fan project, but it's definitely not professional grade. Harvo handles the story Tag You're It, written by Ken Penders, and it definitely doesn't look nice. It doesn't really read nice either. Basically just being an extended excuse to show us a character we won't be meeting again for a while longer, in an attempt to build up some mystery, and having the Chaotix, who I remind you did not want to become a team or even really be around one another at the end of the main story, playing a game of tag with each other. It's harmless, and does nothing to really advance the plot. Even the introduction of the Stranger doesn't do anything, considering that it's the same Stranger that's been dogging Knuckles in all of these recent backup issues. Ken handles both the art and the story in this second backup, and while the artwork is a little bit better than the last time he handled those duties, it's still amateur hour. At least the story is a bit more interesting, with the mysterious Archimedes going on an all-out offensive against Knuckles and the Chaotix. With each threat they're faced with, one of the Chaotix is taken out of the fight, ending with Espio being outright kidnapped right under Knuckles' nose. Now all alone, the mysterious Archimedes once again ridicules Knuckles for his lack of foresight and planning, and how he let all of his friends get taken down easily, without trying to work with them to figure out what is happening. And so he's left with a choice: find and save his friends, or figure out what's going on the floating isle. This story, artwork aside, is probably the highlight of the book. It's still a little too heavy on dialogue for my liking, but it does a very good job of establishing a new threat for Knuckles to take on, and separates him from his new team straight away. Except for Heavy and Bomb, who we seem to have forgotten about, and despite everything that's said here, it still doesn't really convey Knuckles as not being a very good planner, considering that everyone else rushes in on their own anyway, and the attacks happen so fast that there's not really a whole lot he could have done to stop them. The only one he reasonably could have prevented was Espio's kidnapping, which was a sneak attack, and Mighty staying behind to fight with the weird robot. But in terms of actually continuing the story, this one has a lot more impact than anything else that's been leading up to this, even if it was a little clumsy. Next time, we're going to finally go back to the main issues for a decent amount of time. At least 3 issues, all things considered. Look forward to it as we dive into Sonic the Hedgehog issue 31. See you next time, everyone.